Okay, hello everybody. I think we'll get started. Welcome to our session on International Framework for NPO Reporting. So I wanted to start off framing this with an example of some financial statements from, in this particular case, Nigeria, because this gets quite theoretical, and I wanted to get us rooted in some real sorts of financial statements. So here's an example of an income expenditure statement from, this is Nigeria, so those ends are Naira. And what you can see here, we've got 100% restricted grant income for both years. In the notes, you can see here there are 2 donors, but it doesn't tell us how much is from each donor. And it says it's an accounting policy, but it says the following summarizes some statement of accounting policies applied by the organization. Grants are received from the following donor. The amounts have been converted at rates. Some of the projects are still ongoing. So it's not really an accounting policy. It's not really telling us very much about how they're recognizing those grants. So that's your income statement. And you can see it's not in columns. It hasn't got restricted and unrestricted. It's one big thing. And here's what our balance sheet. The top looks fairly familiar, but you'll see at the bottom of the balance sheet, we've got accumulated fund and a project asset fund. And in the notes, that accumulated fund is just previous plus our surplus. And I happen to know that this 67 million naira of accumulated reserves is, of course, restricted, mostly restricted funds belonging to specific donors, but they haven't been splitting it out. And then the one I find particularly interesting is Project Assets Fund. This represents capital grants for assets acquired under projects which had been previously written off to direct project expenses on a cash basis, now capitalized. We've expended it to the donor, but we need to put it on the top of our balance sheet. Debit, assets, credit, what? We'll go credit equity. Now, this just gives a bit of an illustration of the kind of variety. I did not have to look hard for these. It was literally the first set of statements that I came across when I was looking for one, and it perfectly demonstrated. And of course, if we looked at 10 more, we'd find 10 more different examples of a wide range, a variety of ways that different organizations are presenting. So I thought we'd start with that, just to kind of root us in a reality, and maybe some of you have seen similar financial statements. So what we're going to do this morning, we're going to start with a bit of background, progress and plans, which Ian Carruthers will take us through. Then John from Ford Foundation will give us a donor perspective. We'll be looking at, Jeff will take us through addressing the financial reporting challenges, and then I'll take us through engaging stakeholders. So without further ado, Ian.
So thank you, Sam. Moving into the first of those sessions, just to stress, I'm doing this presentation as Chair of Standards for CIPFA, not as Chair of the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board, although having just been to the session from FASB, the similarity between the issues is quite alarming, but anyway. So, in terms of background, very briefly, this really is a reiteration of comments that we made in the launch session earlier on today. I think the context really is this increasingly international picture that non-profit organisations are facing, both in terms of the fact that they have entities registered in different countries, but also the fact that they're receiving funding from elsewhere, around the world. And problem being that the reporting requirements are inconsistent. And I think, Sam gave an excellent example of the kinds of inconsistency that you find. And it's the fact that some of those are allowed under some regimes, but not for others. Some donors would be fine, others wouldn't, all those kinds of things. And overarching all of this, leaving the politics aside, there are no international standards at this point in time, and it's a problem for both donors and organisations receiving resources, because it wastes time, costs, and so on. As I said before, we know that this is an issue where people actually want guidance. Both Tim and I were involved in some earlier work, which was sponsored by the UK professional accountancy organisations, done by a group of academics. And what it showed was in the 605 responses we had literally from around the world, and I think that pie chart is quite striking in terms of the fact that there is, it's not your usual suspects, it is from around the world, is the fact that 72% agreement that some form of international standard would be useful, strong or strongly agreed, was the response. The question was, what should that be and who should provide it? Neither of those questions actually had answers at that stage. Talking from the international perspective, the international standards boards have particular constituent groups. So ISB, the International Accounting Standards Board, very much has the driver in terms of getting consistent reporting requirements from a capital markets perspective. The International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board is a smaller organisation, but it is very much focused on public sector, both quite distinct constituencies. There is a commonality of issues in a number of areas, so they're not mutually exclusive, but there are some very distinctive perspectives that you get, particularly in the public sector. And both boards are constrained. They have formal mandates in terms of their work, and also they're resourced in different ways, but in terms of the work programs they have, those are focused on serving the needs of their constituents. So there's a gap. There has been some work going on, an informal grouping of national standard setters through this organisation, the International Forum of Accounting Standard Setters. That's a working group that I've chaired for the last 3 years. And what we focused on doing, because this is a spare time activity, or has been for all of us, is very much just to try and start to synthesize what's out there, what are the frameworks, what is the guidance available. So if you go to that website, you'll see some of the research and summarization that's already been done. But again, these are groups of people working in their spare time and so on, so nobody's really had the ability to take this forward to really start to move into the next stage, which is the development of guidance. And that is where we are now. That is really the newsworthiness of today, is this announcement that this project will move forward. And we're incredibly grateful to Open Society Foundation, Ford Foundation, for being those who will really get the ball rolling. I think uniquely about this initiative is the partnership between CIPFA and Humentum. If you like, CIPFA, we're bringing the financial standards setting community with us at both national and international levels, and Humentum bringing the NPO community. And I think it's bringing those communities together, which is going to be the really important thing about this project. Now, this is huge. What we're trying to do is actually make this manageable, do something. So the proposed approach is to use the International Financial Reporting Standard for small and medium-sized enterprises as the start point. It may not be perfect, but it is actually accepted in 85 or 86 jurisdictions around the world. So we think it's a good place to start. Even with that, and providing incremental guidance around that, the project will still take us 5 years. We're envisaging 3 stages. The first one being a consultation paper, surface the issues, get input to those, get people talking to us, mobilise the issue, the interest and so on. Sam will talk about that. Then move into the more formal development of guidance through draft guidance and exposure draft. That will take us through the period 2021 to 2023, and then finalise that guidance. So that's the 3-stage process. In terms of CIPFA and Humentum and our respective roles, CIPFA will provide the technical input to it, so I will chair the technical advisory group, which will include representatives from national standard setters around the world, as well as, we hope, an observer from the International Accounting Standards Board. They've certainly indicated an interest in some form of involvement, even although it isn't formally an ISB project or anything like that. And as I said, Humentum very much the sector convener. And one of the important important things will be this isn't just a standard setters initiative. We want actually to have a group of practitioners to actually advise us as we go through the development process. So yes, you'll have the opportunity to comment as we do the consultation paper, the exposure draft, but we want input during the process, and that's really where the practitioner advisory group comes in. So that's what I wanted to do in terms of the introduction to this, and hand over now to John Bernstein to give us the funder perspective.
Thanks, Ian, and thank you all for coming. So for those of you that we're not still at the coffee bar at 9 o'clock this morning, you may have heard some of this already, but I really just wanted to add my own perspective on behalf of the Ford Foundation, and certainly Open Society Foundations feels the same way as we committed to invest the initial capital in this project. We are very excited about it. We do think it's really important. I was a little worried when you showed that financial statement in Naira, because we've got an office in Lagos, that like, were we one of those funders? Like, did we accept that financial statement? And maybe we did, you know. So it is a problem in the sector. We are now, you know, requiring a financial due diligence of our grantees before we make grants, and in the international space, it's very complicated. A lot of our grantees don't know exactly what we're asking for and don't have the internal systems and the standards to produce what we need. And we're not alone. So bilaterals, other foundations, other funders are asking for these kinds of things. It's a real problem. It is not the way we want our grantees spending their time and money. So, you know, we think that this is a critically important effort. And we really think that this is an opportune moment to try it. It's problematic for the grantees. It's problematic for us. It's just not good. And I think there's a very little, at least in my space, in the funder community, there's kind of not that much awareness of it. You know, when I talked to some of my colleagues, even my president, you know, about this issue, he was like, really? That doesn't exist? You know, because we're so used to the success of it, I think, in the for-profit world, that we're kind of shocked that we haven't done this ourselves. And with Humentum and CIPFA on board, we really feel like the plan that they've put together could really make a change here. And this would be an incredible benefit, you know, to all of you, to the sector at large. So we're delighted to be able to have kick-started it with a couple of grants, not insubstantial. And as I said in my opening comments this morning, this is very much aligned with the mission of the Ford Foundation, at least. I wish I could speak for all donors. I can't. But we really believe that building strong financial institutions, building strong grantees, the financial health of the institutions that we're trying to support is critical to achieving the outcomes that we're trying to achieve in the world. I think that is true whether you're a social justice funder or any other kind of funder. And the reality is that, you know, we, you know, in this country, much less around the global south, are often, you know, funding organizations that are not financially healthy. And, you know, we could be making our grants differently if we had clear, transparent insight into the financial health of those organizations, and we're only going to have that with standard financial information. So lots of reasons that this is a good idea from a donor perspective, hopefully from an NPO perspective as well, and we're excited to be part of it. So thank you for the idea, and thank you for bringing it to us.
So I'm Jeff Mechanic, and with the Financial Accounting Standards Board of the U.S. And anything I say here today is not U.S. GAAP, all that sort of thing. Okay. So I've had the pleasure of working with Ian on the IFAS, the International Forum of Accounting Standards Setters, informal working group now for the past few years. And this is a tremendously important initiative to us, to funders, to many others, for all the reasons that have been stated before. And I look forward to continuing to work on this as well. Here are just, I mean, Sam was talking a little while ago about some of the, talking about the financial statements, giving that example and so forth, but there are many, many areas in terms of the types of transactions and issues that not-for-profits get involved in, that where there is this inconsistency and or lack of standards around the world from the accounting perspective. Here are a few that are listed. I could probably list endowments. I could list a whole bunch of other things that are not even on here, but there are many, many different issues that we would be addressing in our project. And as Ian mentioned, we're looking to leverage off of, develop what's already out there. What's already out there in terms of standards for business enterprises that we can then layer this onto, as well as some of the ideas and standards that are out there for not-for-profits in different countries that Ian mentioned when he was talking about the work that this group has been doing to compile that up until now. There are many issues for us to address, but we think that this a phased approach of filling in these gaps for not-for-profit organizations is probably the best approach. We think that our sweet spot, the spot where it makes the most sense to start, is for the small and mid-sized not-for-profits as opposed to the micro not-for-profits or the very large and complex not-for-profits. And we do have the ability to layer on to IFRS for small and medium-sized entities, which is the foundation for business reporting in many of the countries where we've heard the greatest hue and cry for standards, especially countries in sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and different parts of Asia. We think that that's the right place to start, but our consultation paper in the first phase of this will help confirm that or dispute that. The other areas that we might ultimately work on is some additional guidance for micro-sized not-for-profits that are otherwise reporting on a cash basis to the extent that we can leverage some things to put in to help them. And again, we'll see what kind of a need there is for them based on the consultation paper. And then at some point, even within these countries where there's the greatest hue and cry, there are lots of large and complex not-for-profit organizations. The types of things that we think about here in the United States in the university sector or the healthcare sector and so forth. Types of not-for-profits where the guidance based on IFRS for SMEs, small and medium-sized entities, may not be sufficient, and that we perhaps need a guidance that gets layered onto full International Financial Reporting Standards, IFRS. Our hope is that by that time, maybe the ISB might actually be in a position to jump aboard. That would really be the ideal situation for the professional standard setters for international standards to come and, set standards. But we'll see, we'll see if by that time, maybe with this rush of standards that we're all now implementing on leases and revenue recognition and so forth, maybe at some point in the future, the ISB's agenda might open up a bit more. One thing, John was talking about all the benefits to funders and as well as to the NGOs themselves, but we do see this the initiative as being complementary as opposed to duplicative of what's being done by the Good Financial Grant Practice Initiative. That initiative deals with procurement and financial management and all sorts of, and human resources and all sorts of other things that are important in strengthening the capacity of the not-for-profit, but doesn't really deal with what we're dealing with in this project. So we think that what we're doing is important, and it complements this other initiative that's really important as well. And then this slide really just lists, what is in the content of what is in that website that our informal group has been compiling over the last few years. And I'll just move on because I do want to get to to your participation in this panel. So we have some discussion items for tables, and we'd like your answers. We want you to spend 10 minutes discussing these three questions. What are your views on the proposed guidance development approach that we're outlining? What other financial reporting topics should we consider besides the handful that we've listed? And any other thoughts or questions that you might have. And so if you would spend about 10 minutes at your tables, and then we'll report out and discuss as a group.
Okay. I think let's see if we can have some feedback from a couple of tables. So if you've been, it's been lovely to hear you talking and hearing lots of active discussions. So if anybody in any tables just got something that you'd like to share, it could be a yes, we think it's great, or a suggestion, or anything. I'd love to hear just some of the comments on the tables. Just put up your hand and yeah.
Oh, sorry. My name is Janine, and I work for Wildlife Conservation Society. So the one thing we addressed with the approach, or we talked about with the approach, is the engagement with local standard setting bodies and also local firms, and how are they going to be involved in this process?
We'll cover that. Actually, the next bit I'm going to present will cover that. Really important. Yeah.
So just to pick up on national standard setters, what we're trying to do is get the national standard setters involved in this technical advisory group so that they're there to advise and to bring in that national level experience as part of that. And as Sam says, we'll pick up on the firms later, but just on the standard setters, we want them involved in this group so that they're there when the debates are actually happening.
So I'm Alex, I'm with JSI, and our discussion is very much, if I'm very honest, we're not quite sure what the it is. Are we talking about treatment versus presentation? Actually, how you're recording various transactions versus, for example, the structure of a footnote? One of the first question that was asked at our table is, well, what's GAP going to think about this? And again, we're sort of, is it another layer? So we're now going to have even more sets of books. So I guess we're sort of puzzled about what is the end result and what will our worlds look like. And if you're getting to that, great. But that was really what we just talked about.
So in terms of the guidance, typically you can think about guidance from three stages. When you recognize a transaction, how do you measure it, and how do you present it or disclose it? So the idea is that there would be guidance on the sort of topics that Jeff put up, but to be determined through the consultation on those, so recognition, measurement, presentation. Now, in terms of the usage of the guidance and its status, there are two levels at which that could operate. So the national level, the idea is that this guidance could be just straightforwardly direct adopted by different jurisdictions, so they wouldn't have their own requirements for national, for non-profit organisations. They could adopt this, but that is a decision at jurisdiction level. Equally, then in terms of the requirements that the donor community imposes, the idea is that rather than say, Ford having its requirements, USAID having its requirements, that they could actually use this as their core requirements. So it does depend on people actually picking it up and using it. But the real idea is that through the extensive process of engagement with the various different communities, that we get buy-in to it and then people start to use it. Because it's that buy-in which is going to be crucial to actually really getting rid of the overhead that there is at the moment and actually getting the money from the donors through to actually frontline services.
And then with respect to your question on GAP, I better give this to Jeff.
Thanks. As Ian said, it would then be up to each individual jurisdiction as to what it is that that they would adopt. We're talking about a lot of countries that have no standards whatsoever for not-for-profits, as well as ones that have very little standards for not-for-profits. Here in the U.S., we have standards. Whether U.S. organizations want to use whatever we come up with, it'll be dependent on two things. One, will this be a recognized set of standards by those who regulate this area, which is not us, and by those who use the financial statements? You may not know this, but the AICPA, which provides guidance and standards for auditors, and then the state accountancy boards, who are the ones who license the auditors, who give opinions on the financial statements, do allow IFRS and IFRS for SMEs to be used here in the U.S., but very few use them. And in the not-for-profit sector, nobody would be basically using it because there's no guidance that's attached to it. So again, this is to try to fill in all of these voids around the world. What happens here in the U.S., we'll see.
Yeah,
add one little bit to this. This was, in a sense, part of the challenge when we did the original research, is that, in general, developed countries, UK, US, have developed standards or guidance for the not-for-profit sector, and most of the developing world hasn't. So it was a challenge. It's going to be a challenge to convince the developed countries to engage with this and adopt this. So, which is why we're so glad that Jeff is doing that. And in the UK, for any people that have got either operating in the UK or subsidiaries in the UK, the Charity Commission is going to be reviewing SORP in the time frame of the development of the standard, and they have expressed a willingness to cooperate with us. So, that could be very useful in the UK context.
We've been engaged, the FASB's been engaged for the better part of a decade or more on an international scene with international standard setters about business guidance. And as a result, we've done a lot of converging on revenue and leases and a whole bunch of other things over the last decade. This is our first real opportunity to do something like that on the not-for-profit and the not-for-profit sector. And I look forward to that a lot.
Another question or comment?
Yes, we're talking in our table. It's Lucy Berkowitz, Innovations for Poverty Action. One of the pieces that requires disentangling for us is the distinction between centrally consolidated accounts and branch accounts or local subsidiary. And clearly we all have different registration structures, but there is a lot of confusion. For us, we sign every agreement centrally, and therefore the income at the local subsidiary is the income we push down to them, or in-kind contributions of things we don't charge them. But we have continual reviews with auditors who don't get that, even from quite large international firms. And indeed, in the past 10 years or so, I've had audit partners, even from the same firms, with diametrically opposed views as to what should be counted. So I think this will also be very useful for the profession.
A good topic to have on the list. It's a really big issue, isn't it? And are you registered? Are you legal entity? Are you required by the jurisdiction to report? And this won't really change that or solve that, but for those that are required to report in a jurisdiction, then that jurisdiction has the option to require this guidance. And then others, if they have the option to choose which guidance they want to use, they can choose that as well. So I'm going to continue with the rest of the presentation, and we'll have another section for getting your feedback on another bit as well. So the key part, the CIPFA part of this equation is the technical rigor of the standard setting and the international standard setting community. And as it's been mentioned, the Humentum side of it is this stakeholder engagement. So what does that look like? So in terms of who we need to engage, there are a wide range. It's not just NPOs, because we can't change this by ourselves. So if we think of at the national level in the bottom left there, I live in Uganda. So if I think of the Uganda situation, it's the NGO board in Uganda, that's the part of the Uganda government that regulates NGOs in Uganda. They would be the entity that would need to adopt or allow this to be used for Ugandan registered NGOs. And we need to replicate that in each country. In each country, there will be a part of national government that's in charge of regulating NPOs. And they will be the ones that will need to adopt this. So we need to be engaging them right from the start. There's no point in doing all this and then I'm asking them at the end, because we need to get them on board from the beginning. Those national governments will take advice from their national accountancy institutes. So again, in Uganda, the Institute of ICPAO, Institute of Chartered Public Accountants of Uganda, and the Kenyan and the Guatemalan, etc. And every single country will have its National Institute of Accountants, which is where the government will take technical advice from. We need to be engaging them. Local auditors will be part of those. So in every country, you'll have local audit firms that are regulated by their national institutes. Then, of course, we've got the financial statement preparers. It might be local NGOs that are registered in a specific country that would need to actually implement it. And then the users of those financial statements, which might be donors, but let's please not forget the beneficiaries and other really important user groups and stakeholders. If you think of the whole purpose of financial statements, it's so that the users can make good decisions based on those financial statements. We mustn't lose the very heart of that in terms of the purpose of financial statements. So at the national level, and very many countries, there's a huge broad range of stakeholders. Some of those have regional bodies. So if you think of accountancy institutes, PAFA is the Pan-African Federation of Accountants. There's equivalents in Latin America and other regions. And then we have international standard setters, which obviously we're very well plugged in. Most of them are represented at this table. Auditors, also, you'll have local firms, you'll have local branches of global firms. Can we get to the head offices, the charity head offices of the audit firms to engage them at global level so they can engage their offices internationally? Also, donors obviously have country level, regional level, and international level. And even donors, we have local donor offices and global offices. So there's a really broad range of types of stakeholders and different levels of local and international that's really key to engage here. This is why I said it's almost insanely impossible. I mean, it's very ambitious. So the ways that we have thought through of how to do this, one, obviously, we have to have a website. You can't really go very far without a website. So at the moment, it's embedded within the Humentum website, but in time, there'll be a separate one, where people can sign up to say they're interested and then get emails with different things that are happening so that they can engage with the process. And on that website, there will be some explainer videos. Quite a lot of this is quite technical. And even if you're an accountant, some of it's really technical. So having some explainer videos that are just a bit easy to unpack, short in length, bit of visuals, plain English, just to help different people engage with some of these technical terms and issues. Blogs, articles, newsletters, keeping it alive, all the different meetings that we're having and different comments from different people. The other thing on the project website will be really key is to show who is on board, because that gives it credibility. Knowing that IASB are interested in being observers, knowing that Ford Foundation and OSF have given seed funding, and the weight of the people involved gives credibility. And the more organizations we can say, CRS or CARE, or big names are involved in this, and we get a sort of a critical mass of people being involved, that lends credibility, and then people are thinking we don't want to be left out, rather than shall we be part of this. So that's, again, the website will be the home of showing the growing engagement with it. And then we will be hosting webinars as well, both Humentum webinars, but also within different organizations and networks. So we'll be going to audit firms and donors and hosting webinars within their communities to get the word out there and encourage people to register. The second sort of leg of the engagement strategy is developing online stakeholder groups. So these will be sort of networks where we'll be frequently in touch, having online meetings. Most of this is going to be online. We're trying to keep the physical meeting to a strategic minimum, but where people can reach out. We've got, obviously, the practitioners advisory group, which is really key. That's going to be about 35 people from a range of stakeholders and geographies who we can reach out to quickly, and they can reach out and we can get feedback in real time on issues that are being discussed. And there'll also be funder and NGO subgroups, stakeholder groups that we can reach out to. We're also focusing on 10 regions and then sort of 2 regions within each country. So we're targeting 20 sort of really strategic countries, which would be pivot for the regions around them. And in each of those countries, we're looking to identify a champion, one individual who's on a voluntary basis, but is passionate about this, is technically conversant with some of the challenges, connected within that community. And that those champions, we will work with those champions to facilitate meetings in their countries. So rather than us having to travel everywhere, we'll work through local champions who can facilitate meetings, which will help them to share the issues and encourage that debate and engagement. And then finally, there'll be regional roundtable events. So we're having 10 regional physical events where people will fly and come to. And again, those have been very strategically picked, and the people that are coming are going to be hopefully very influential, again, across governments and auditors and all those different stakeholder groups, especially for getting feedback on the consultation paper and on the exposure draft. That it's not just going to be email, there are going to be real meetings and meaty consultation, so that could be fed back to the technical advisory group, and they've got a wide range of opinions to feed into their joyous task of creating something that everybody's going to love. It's going to be impossible, but anyway. The best, so that the majority is understood and heard, and they're not making things that aren't going to be practical and workable on the ground. So that's some of the engagement strategy. There's variety, but that's some of the key pillars of what we're hoping to do. I haven't got a slide of it, but at the moment, the budget is, you ready, $4.6 million over 5 years. And most of that is engagement and the few bits of convenings of physical groups of the TAG and the technical advisory group and what have you. Hopefully we'll find a way of reducing that over time as we get clearer how things work. But and the funding from Ford and OSF, which is amazing, it's been $1 million to get that started, which is fantastic. But we are over time also going to need to, as Ford and OSF said, if this is a donor-funded thing completely, it loses its credibility. It kind of needs the whole sector to be pitching in with their support and their buy-in to have the credibility and the validity of being owned by the sector. So a lot of the outreach will be obviously asking opinions on things, but there will be bits of, can you host this and can we do this, and getting people to contribute as well, because it's a huge thing that the reason why it's never kicked off is nobody's been able to pay for it. So now we've got something started, we can keep that going. So I'm not going to take you through lots of detail on this, but this really shows how, in the strategy, the engagement processes link into the development processes. So at the setup, we've obviously got the project launch. The website is already there. When it gets to the consultation paper, the technical group will develop the paper, and then we, on the Humentum side, and through the practitioner advisory group, will be developing a communication, explanatory materials, the videos, country awareness events, and collecting feedback and online. And then that will then go back to the technical advisory group who'll analyze it and report on that. They'll use that to develop and publish the guidance, which then the whole stakeholder outreach engagement part will share it, make sure there's awareness, get feedback on it, and that feeds back into the technical advisory. So there's a kind of the feedback loop between the two sides. It's kind of well laid out. I think what's interesting then at the end, so the launching the guidance is almost the end of this, but it's not really. Launching the guidance is actually the beginning. Then it's adoption. Which countries are adopting it? How can we support them? How can we monitor? How can we strategically make sure that regions move together? How can we develop the right training materials so that once it's adopted, the auditors, the accountants in those regions understand the issues and are able to actually adopt it? We're hoping that even in time, accounting packages will be able to align to this so that you can get QuickBooks that will actually produce you financial statements that are there's a whole host of advantages that can be stacked up. So I think the launch, the production of the guidance is just the beginning of a beautiful future. That's the way I see it. Nothing if not optimistic. So we'd love to hear from you again. So I've got some questions again on this part of the engaging stakeholders. So what are your views on the proposed stakeholder engagement approaches? What other platforms and communication channels should we consider? Are there brilliant ideas you have out there that we could use to reach the right people? Any other thoughts or questions on that? So again, if you could just discuss in your groups and give us your feedback, that would be really helpful. It's another, I think, 5 minutes for that. Yeah, 5 minutes to discuss. Thank you very much. So I hope you've had some good chats there. We'd love to hear some of your thoughts. So if you've got something that you discussed in your tables that you'd like to share with us, please pop up your hand and we'll take you the microphone. Yes.
Hello, Martina Bond, FHI 360. we understand that we're all here and the call is to join you, right? Join your site, sign on. A question from our side is, or what we think would be really useful is the endorsement of major donors. So having USAID say, this is how we want to receive information from your grantees, or DFID, which is another organization that we struggle to meet all their requirements, that kind of alignment. And also like multilateral lending agencies. The World Bank, agencies that deal directly with governments, they have more sway. Are those folks you are targeting?
It's a really important question, and I think a really clear distinction that we have to make is that this is about an entity's general purpose financial statements. This is going to complement and support the area of donor grant reporting, but it won't replace it. Right? Because if you think of a particular project, well, that's part of the whole transactions of an organization. It might need to be for a different period. It might need to be against different expenditure lines. It might need to be in a different currency, which is the requirement of the donor. So we're not advocating or pretending that this will replace all need for donor reporting. That's another, we have another project on that, which Tim can tell you more about. That's another one. This will certainly have an impact on that, because what we'll find is if there's more standardization about each individual entity and the way they record transactions across donors, you can be more clear that the transactions that are coming for this project report are coming from one ledger, which we can audit as an entirety, rather than just lots of individual project reporting that we get in entities at the moment. But it doesn't replace that. However, coming back to what you said, yes, we are certainly engaging with donors for them to endorse the process and to say, yes, we believe this is a good thing. If USAID gets involved, they would be saying, yes, we think it's important that entities have good financial reporting and we want to be part of the process. They wouldn't be saying, this replaces a fund accountability statement and we're going to throw all our requirements out of the window. Does that answer your question? But yeah, we really would love to work with funders on this and are planning to.
And that concern for legitimacy, again, this is at an organization-wide level, reporting is exactly why we're focusing on an IFRS platform, which is recognized by all of these multilateral agencies and governments and so forth around the world.
Brilliant. Another question or comment?
Yeah, hi, I'm Rachel Murdoch with Mercy Corps. My first comment is really around the engagement that you wanted feedback on. I think that it's really optimistic almost in order to be able to engage with all local bodies and kind of all of those local governments, standard setters. I think that it's a great idea. So I definitely am supportive of it, but I think it's pretty optimistic as far as the ability to actually engage with that many parties. And then I guess the second part of that is this: as you do incorporate their feedback and you get a lot of people giving you their kind of insights, who is the decision maker or what is the decision making body? So how to gather that feedback and actually make people feel like they've given legitimate insights and they're being heard and it's being incorporated. How is that going to happen?
I'll take the first part and then I'll give it to Ian for the second part. So you're right. I mean, it's not that we will engage with every single government and every single auditor and every single local NGO. Of course not. But we want to make sure we are getting a representatives of each of those and a cross-section of each of those so that none of those voices are left out or ignored. Certainly in many countries there are NGO bureaus or NGO forums, sort of groups of NGOs. I know in Uganda there's one where thousands of local NGOs are member of one umbrella organization. So by using those sorts of networks, you can touch and reach out to and give people the opportunity. Not everybody will want to engage with it, and that's also fine, but at least people feel that they've had the opportunity, and we make sure that the feedback we get has got a level of representation of different voices. I think that would be the key thing, rather than, getting everybody. That's certainly not realistic. Let me, Ian, about how the feedback.
Yeah, so the technical advisory group is going to be the forum where the technical debates actually happen. And I think what we'd aim for is that group would reach a consensus ultimately on the proposed solutions. But, ultimately we may reach a situation where, we have to go with a majority or something like that within that group. But through the process of engagement, what we want to do is actually at least surface as many of the issues as possible, which is the consultation paper phase, really get both the practical and the standard setting input to those as we develop the guidance. Now, if we can't come to a consensus within the group, when we actually expose that draft guidance, we may well put alternatives in there to see which, what gains the most support, and to see what people say about practical impacts and so on. And then we'll take that into developing the final guidance. So, there's going to be a lot of discussion and debate that goes on within that group, but also using what, everybody here and all the people that Sam's been talking about, that intelligence to get that into the debate and the discussion. And I think it's very interesting. If you went to the session that Jeff just did about what FASB is doing, actually, the issues that Jeff was talking about are exactly the issues which are causing headaches within the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board. If you've been to our June meeting, you would have heard pretty much all of those discussed. So I think, there's very much a common agenda amongst national and international standard setters at the moment, and this process of dialogue, I think, will help that, as we move through this process.
Great. I know there was one other question, but we're a bit short of time. So I'm going to finish here, and hopefully we can continue to engage. Please, if you've got more comments and questions, please continue to engage. So there's the website. Please sign up today. It's humentum.org/IFR for NPO, which is a slightly easier way to say International Financial Reporting for Non-Profit Organizations. Please sign up and share that link, and please do engage. And we'd love to hear your thoughts and advice and anything else. It falls to me to say a huge thank you to the very high-powered gentlemen we have in this room. Thank you very, very much for coming. Jeff from FASB, Tim from Humentum, Ian from CIPFA, and John from Ford Foundation. Thank you very, very much indeed.